Weapon X Facility, Southern Quebec, Canada, May 4, 2012. Harsh alarms and flashing red lights filled the corridors of the concrete halls of an underground facility. Harsh shadows danced over a scene that would fit well into a horror movie, the twisted and torn bodies of guards and scientists alike littering the floors, the spreading pools of blood blending together. Death stalked the hidden facility, following the mission given to them by Dr. Sarah Kinney. Zale Rice, Dr. Rice, fled as best as he could with a wounded leg. He had called the rest of the guards to block the path of that little demon, hoping for enough time to get to the stasis tubes to wake up one of the other experiments to protect him. He hadn't counted on the knife that had been unerringly thrown into his Achilles tendon from the ensuing melee, and now he was paying the price for his arrogance. His father had been killed by the Wolverine during that experiment's escape from the original Weapon X facility, and the younger Dr. Rice had taken great enjoyment in torturing the female clone of the monster that had taken his father from him. The day he had bombarded the child with a lethal dose of radiation to encourage her mutation had been one of the greatest days of his life, watching through the shielded window as she lay there strapped to the bed screaming in agony as her cells were torn apart from the inside. The fact that she survived the procedure, awakening the monstrous healing factor that she inherited from her own father, was just a matter of professional pride on his part. And now, he wished he had never even heard of the Weapon X program in the first place, as the soft steps of X-23 padded up behind him, occasionally splashing in the blood trailing from the open wound in his leg. Reaching up with a trembling hand, Dr. Rice tried to open the door that stood between him and his salvation, his bloody hand slipping twice before gaining purchase on the handle. Dr. Rice let out a loud curse as the weight of his body slid along the opening door, his shoulder slamming into the hard floor. A burst of adrenaline flooded his body as the faint, yet familiar, snick of X-23's claws echoed in hallway behind him. Scrambling as best he could, and fighting against his blood loss and pain, he made his way towards where the test clones of the monster chasing him hung weightless in suspended animation within their liquid-filled tubes. There was a little keypad on the wall next to each tube, where a code had to be punched in to wake its corresponding test subject up. He had never realized how high they were mounted before now, designed to be used by someone standing on their feet, not slumped in a bloody mess against the wall. Come on, Dr. Rice muttered to himself, his trembling hand stabbing at the buttons to enter the required 6-digit code. 1, 3, 3, 7, 5, 4 Yok. 2 adamantium claws burst through the front of his chest, piercing his heart and his left lung, and the dying doctor slumped back to the cold concrete floor as blood dribbled from his mouth. His heart still tried to beat a few more times as the blades slipped out of his back, before his nervous system lit up in a final explosion of signals that caused his body to spasm for the last few moments of his death. I stood there for a moment, staring at the dead body laying in front of me for a few shocked moments before my senses caught up with me. I absently noticed placing my hand on cold smooth surface next to me as I bent forward, my stomach rebelling against me and sending whatever it was I had last eaten down onto the horrified face of the man I had apparently just killed as I woke up. The first spasm was followed by yet another as my body went on autopilot, and I was just starting to remember the dream I had just woken up from where I had talked to a goddess, or was that 3 goddesses about saving their galaxy, or something. 14 years of life crashed into me like a cargo ship riding a tsunami wave, and my free hand went to the side of my head as I did my best to not be overwhelmed by the memories of a life of training, torture, and death. Oh, so much death. One good thing that came of this sudden onset of memories was realizing just who I had woken up killing, and I glared at the body of Dr. Rice for a long moment as my own anger at what he had done to me in this life overwhelmed the apathy that I had been raised with as X-23. I had already thrown up on him, so spitting on his corpse would be relatively redundant, but I did feel better about myself after giving his dead body a kick or 2 on the balls. Was that petty? Yeah, just a bit, but the asshole deserved it. Philosophy and self-inspection would have to wait until I had a better handle on my situation, so I took a few steps back from his body and looked around the room that I was in. It took me a few moments to recognize what I was looking at as I peered into the 4 tubes standing before me. Each one held a young woman, the youngest looking to be maybe 7 or 8, and the oldest maybe 11, definitely just shy of puberty. The oldest one had pure white hair and pale skin, while the other 3 had jet black hair and slightly tanned skin. Their features were all identical, except for the scattering of scars each one had on their faces. Leaning closer to the blood-splattered keypad next to the closest tube, I looked at the text written on the little metal plate attached to the wall above it. It read, X-23_1BL. No fucking way, I muttered to myself, looking at one of the clones that had been made of X-23 in the comics. Belladonna. That means that the other three are. Yep, it was Zelda, Paris, and Gabrielle. But that made no sense, as all four of them had been created by Alchemax in the comics. But then again, the original X-23 had been created much earlier in the Marvel 616 reality, and she hadn't actually been part of the reality chain I had asked to be reborn into. I only hoped that this was the largest change that had been made to accommodate me. Dipping into my most recent memories to find out when exactly I was, now that I had the wear, I realized that I had no idea what the actual date was. Typical, since that wasn't something that the facility thought that their little pet assassin needed to know on a regular basis. What I did know, on the other hand, was that I had just been given the mission to kill all of the guards and scientists in the facility by Dr. Sarah Kinney, and my new mother was waiting outside for me so that she could tell me that I didn't have to be X-23 anymore. I also knew, thanks to the memories I had carried forward from my previous life, that my mom had been hit with the trigger scent that would cause me to kill whoever carried it. Yeah, fuck that. Okay, so, time to make some plans. First off, I need to keep myself from killing my mom. Second, I need to make sure that my sisters will be okay, which would be much easier if I achieved the first goal. Third, I needed to get the hell away from here, and cut ties with my new family, if I wanted to have any chance of being able to succeed in my main goal. You know, helping save an entire galaxy from the Reapers. Taking a deep breath to center myself, I looked around the room for a few moments before spotting a computer terminal sitting on the opposite side of the room from my sisters. Getting a sudden idea, I walked around the floor-mounted desk and sat down in front of the screen, ignoring the gliding sensation of my twin claws retracting back into my forearm as I made my way over. Whoever had been sitting at this system before I attacked had apparently not taken the time to log out, and I shook my head at their lack of security as I navigated the unusual interface. They apparently had all of their files on a main server that could be accessed from their different terminals, and a quick search revealed all of the information they had on the cloning process, including the genetic markers for my particular X gene that they had used to make my four sisters. The real jackpot, though, was the information that they had on working with adamantium, including the process used to create it in the first place, assuming you had the vibranium to work with. But I already had a plan for that. Searching through the desk drawers, I found what my memories identified as a high-density solid-state thumb drive, and plugged it into an access port on the terminal. Setting the pertinent files from the server to copy over to the thumb drive, I noted the 10-minute transfer window, and stood up from the desk to accomplish my next goal while I waited. Several of the guards had worn fancy rebreather masks so that they wouldn't inhale any harmful gases or smoke, and it didn't take me long to locate one of them strapped to the face of a dead body out in the hallway. Briefly noting that the memories of my new life made dealing with dead bodies like this much easier, and wondering whether that was a good thing or not, I took the mask over to a nearby water fountain and cleaned it until it no longer reeked of fresh split blood. Drying the mask off on a clean scrap of cloth cut from one of the numerous lab coats, I placed it on my face and adjusted the straps for a better fit. Testing the filters on the mask by taking a few shallow breaths through my nose, followed by a few much deeper breaths, I was pleased the fact that the only thing I smelled was the lingering scent of the small amount of blood that I hadn't quite managed to remove. Giving myself a relieved, hidden smile, I made my way back into the room that held my sisters just as the files finished copying. Carefully removing the thumb drive from the terminal, I looked down for the first time at the clothes I was wearing and groaned. Fucking sexist fashion, I grumbled to myself, examining the tight black pants that looked to be practically glued to my thin if athletic legs. By the goddess, why would you ever design pants without pockets? My shirt wasn't much better, lacking not only pockets, but sleeves. And the thumb drive wouldn't really fit beneath the short leather bracers strapped to my wrists either. Fuck it, I muttered to myself. I'm gonna steal a coat from the mudroom. Not like they'll miss it. Giving one last, longing look at my sisters, I made my way back out into the carnage I had left in my wake, taking a moment to eye the dead bodies littering the hallway. Stepping over to the first body, I lowered myself into a hachi squat, mindful of the mess around me, and began rummaging through their pockets. I ended up having to roll the body over to get to their wallet, only to be disappointed by the small amount of colorful Canadian money held within. I ignored the credit and debit cards, since they would be useless without a PIN number, and any transactions I did with them could be easily traced. Grabbing the helmet and an extra filter mask from one of the dead guards, I looted my way back towards the entrance of the facility, slowly filling it with loose dollar bills, coins, and spare filters for my mask. Reaching the main entrance, and the scattering of dead guards that had mounted the initial defense, I placed the helmet and extra mask gently on the floor and began searching through the selection of coats hanging on the coat rack. Most of them were much too large for my 14-year-old body, and many of them were just downright ugly, and I was just about to give in and grab the least horrible of them when my hands came across buttery soft sheepskin. Biting my lower lip, I caressed the sleeve of the coat for a moment, before gently pulling it off of its hanger. The sunlight reflecting off the snow outside cut through the windows into gloom of the facility, revealing a traditional World War II-style bomber jacket made of black dyed sheepskin, with a brilliant white cropped fur collar seeming to glow against the dark outer material. I shrugged the jacket on, pleased that it was only a little too big for me, but small enough that I should be able to grow into it over the next few years. Taking a moment to enjoy the soft feel of the silk lining of the sleeves on my bare arms, I then took an inventory of the numerous and wonderful pockets that I had now claimed as my own. The angled openings of the two front pockets had sturdy zippers holding them closed, and a brief inspection revealed a breast pocket on both sides of the inner lining. Carefully tucking the thumb drive into the left breast pocket and closing its normally superfluous zipper, I unzipped the two front pockets to begin loading them with spare filters when the tips of my fingers hit cold metal and plastic. Curious at what I had found, I pulled a set of keys out of the pocket that had been left there by the previous owner of my new jacket, and stared for a moment at the vehicle remote attached to the keys with an unfamiliar company logo molded into the plastic. Well, that's a thing. Shrugging, I placed the keys into the other breast pocket and zipped it up as well. I would have to deal with that later, as I did have a meeting with my mother to get to. Stuffing the rest of the spare filters on the front pockets and zipping them closed as well, I walked over to the front door and pushed it open, stepping over the body of the first guard that I had killed earlier today before waking up. Leave it to Canada to have snow on the ground in May, I grumbled to myself as I followed my boot prints away from the concrete and glass front of the buried facility back to where my mother was waiting. At least the healing factor I inherited from dear old Pops keeps me from really being bothered by the cold. Grumbling to myself some more as I reached the top of the low hill that had hidden my mother, I let out a deep sigh that didn't even miss through the filters of my new mask. Looking around, I spotted Sarah Kinney standing at the bottom of a hill, hugging her arms around herself to try to stay warm in a much too thin gray sport jacket. Does nobody believe in coats around here, Ish? I griped as I prowled down to her with all the grace of a jungle cat, in spite of the snow covering the slope. Oh, thank God you're safe, Sarah said, stepping forward to give me a crushing hug, before pulling back to look at my new coat, and the filter mask covering my lower face. Why are you wearing that ridiculous? No, don't, I shouted, taking a step back as her hands reached for my mask. This eye is the only thing keeping me from killing you right now. Please don't. Sarah's emerald eyes looked at me in shock and confusion for a long moment, before widening in sudden realization, her pupils narrowing down to pinpricks as adrenaline flooded her system. Even though I could thankfully not smell her spike of fear, I could hear the sudden quickening of her heart, and watch as the blood drained from her face. God, what kind of monsters know? Of course they would, my mom cursed, hugging herself again as she shivered from something worse than the cold air. How did you know? I looked through their files, I told her, not exactly lying. Dr. Rice hadn't locked his system before I got there. Thank God, I could only imagine what that. Oh God. Sarah closed her eyes, and I gently took her into my arms as she slumped down to her knees, making sure not to let my mask shift. I closed my own eyes for a moment, remembering the scene in the comic book where X-23 only broke from her trigger-scented rage once her claws had already pierced her mother's chest. I wasn't going to allow that to happen this time. I'd suggest taking a good, long shower, as soon as you can, I advised. But there's more I need to tell you, first. Sarah took a few shaky breaths, and briefly returned my hug before gently pulling back from my embrace. She was very careful not to get close to my face, now that she realized the kind of danger she was in. There's something I need to tell you as well, Sarah said, tears staining her cheeks. You are my daughter. Your name is Laura, not X-23. My Laura, and I love you. My throat got uncomfortably tight as she said this, as I remembered all of those wonderful moments we had spent together, in the dreadful facility I had just killed my way through. She was one of the few bright lights shining in the darkness of my most recent childhood, and it hurts so much to know that in so many other timelines her life had been taken by her own daughter in this very same place. Reaching up, I carefully wiped the tears from the tops of my cheeks, fingers brushing against the pliant rubber of the gasket that kept my mask firmly sealed to my face. I love you too, Mama, I whimpered, wishing with all of my heart that I could safely hug her right now. But I'm not the only daughter you've gained today, and my sisters will need you much more than I will. What? Sarah said, her eyebrows scrunching together in confusion. What sisters? There, back in the facility, I nodded my head towards the nearby hill. They made 4 clones of me, trying to repeat their success. They're in suspended animation right now, but the computer terminal has the codes to release them. They're young, and they haven't had their mama like I have, so it's going to be rough for them. Oh, Laura, Sarah sighed, fresh tears in her eyes. They'll need you too. I can't, I whimpered, taking a shaking breath. I have a new mission now. What? What mission? Sarah asked me, reaching out to place a hand on my shoulder. Who gave you this mission? I did, I sniffed, placing my hand over hers on my shoulder. I'm going to help save the world, and I can't do that if I'm helping raise my sisters. Sarah shook her head in denial, her own breath catching in her throat as her hand tightened possessively on my shoulder. Please, don't leave me, my mother begged me, her words piercing my heart. It's not forever, I told her. I'll stay in touch. I know your personal email address, and I'll make one for myself so I can email you whenever I can. I'll try to visit when I can, but I know of someone who might be able to help me get rid of this damn trigger scent. I don't want to ever risk having my last memory of you being when My voice broke, and I had to look away for a few moments, my grip tightening on her hand. We shared that moment in painful silence, broken only by our sniffles as we stood there in the snow. It took a while for the tightness in my throat to go away, allowing me to talk once more. I know of someone who might be able to help you and my sisters as well, I continued. Try to contact Natasha Romanoff, the Black Widow. She works for S.H.I.E.L.D., a government agency that works with special people like me. Her childhood wasn't much different from mine, and I think she can give a bit of perspective. Oh, okay, Sarah nodded, before gently gathering me in her arms, again being careful about the mask. But, you keep your promise and stay in touch, you hear me? Why yeah, I sighed, squeezing her back. I will. And tell my sisters that I wish I was there for them right now, and that I look forward to meeting them. I will, she sniffed, slowly pulling back from our embrace. Will you at least walk me to the front door? I'd be glad to, I agreed, giving her a wet smile, visible only in my eyes. And, I'm sorry for the mess. Sarah sighed, her face pinching into a pained grimace for a moment, before relaxing and giving me an accepting nod. We carefully made our way over the snow-covered hill, my strong arm and sure footing allowing me to support my mother the few times her shoes slipped. I almost wished the walk had been longer, so that I could spend more time with her, but I knew that it would only be a matter of time before the countryside was crawling with S.H.I.E.L.D. agents. Or, worse, Hydra. I left a spare filter mask next to the coat rack, I told my mother as we stopped outside the front door and looked in at the scattering of dead bodies inside. It will help with, well, the smell. Why yeah, Sarah nodded, her eyes glued to the corpse of the first guard I had killed on the mission she had given to me earlier today. We stood there awkwardly for a while, neither one of us wanting to move, but both of us knowing that we both had important things we needed to be doing right now. My mother finally huffed, reached out and carefully placed her hands on either side of my head, and gave my forehead a heartfelt kiss. You come back to me and your sisters, once you're safe, okay? She asked me, looking me dead in the eyes. Okay, I muttered, feeling horribly awkward. Good, my mother nodded. And I look forward to your emails, okay? Why yeah, I nodded in acceptance. Goddess, I wish I could tell her what was really going on. If I did, then who knew what would happen to the timeline? However, once the important events had come to pass, I would let her know as much as I could. My new mother deserved that much. After giving a very awkward set of lingering goodbyes, I watched as she walked into the building, quickly making her way over to the extra filter mask I had left next to the helmet I had carried my spare filters in. She looked over her shoulder one last time, and I gave her a final, longing wave of my hand before she disappeared into the hallway that led off to where my sisters were held. Taking a deep breath, I looked out into the recently plowed parking lot of the facility with a curious gaze. Reaching into the right breast of my new jacket, I carefully unzipped the pocket there, fishing out the keys that came with it. I took a few moments to look at the unfamiliar logo on the key fob remote, before pressing that lock button. Thankfully, this was one of the vehicles that honked the horn when you did that, to let you know it worked. Unfortunately, that only told me the direction of the vehicle, and there were quite a number of vehicles sitting there. Wandering through the lot, I had the vehicle honk its horn a few more times, my new ears quickly narrowing down where the elusive vehicle sat. Soon enough I found myself standing in front of an older-looking, low-slung cruiser bike, the kind that Honda would make, if they existed in this reality. Not exactly the kind of vehicle one would want to ride around in with weather like this. But, between my healing factor, and the senses and reflexes I had gained with this new body, it shouldn't be much of an issue. After all, the sooner I got out of here, the sooner I could get started. If you like this content, don't forget to like and subscribe. See you later, bye bye.